everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're really excited to be here as part of our mini Leeds Digital Festival with BJSS. So let's get going. So our title and what we wanted to talk to you about today and share some experiences on is around BJSS as how we've become an international consultancy from our being born and our roots in Leeds. So what we're going to run through to today, we've got the contents here. So I'm Hannah Elston. I'm just going to run through a bit of an introduction to BJSS and then hand over to my colleague Pedro, who's going to talk about the expansion that he's been involved into our Portugal business. Then Rebecca's going to talk to you about her story of moving from Leeds to Lisbon. Then Mark is going to talk to you about a similar move for him, but over to the US. And then Sarah and Rich are going to talk about what's coming next from a BJSS and an international standpoint. And then we're going to finish by having a Q&A session at the end. So please do use the Q&A functionality on Zoom so you can post any questions as we're going through. Sarah's going to be facilitating that session at the end, so we'll be keeping a note of any questions there. So please do use that. That would be great. Okay, so then a bit more about BJSS and who we are. So we are, as we sort of say in here, our innovative technology company. What's really important to see from a BJSS perspective is how our services have grown over the years. So we literally have a full end-to-end service offering now, starting right from the beginning from a consulting perspective and sort of business technology consulting, then through design, all the way through cloud platform delivery, looking at data and AI, all the way through to managed service. So we really can and we do offer our clients a full end-to-end service offering. And this is something, especially as we continue to grow internationally, and we're absolutely doing that with recent hires in Portugal, for example, in the design in our Spark agency as well. So that's something that we're going to continue to expand and bring more and more people into the business. So from our locations perspective then, so as we're obviously focusing on our international footprint today, we have got offices now obviously within the UK, so our head office being Leeds, hence Leeds Digital Festival is great. We also have offices in the US, Europe and Australia, so specifically in New York, Boston, Lisbon and now Melbourne. So the company was founded in Leeds back in 1993. We then expanded into the US with opening our New York office back in 2012. And then just last year, we've opened offices in Portugal and Australia. So it really shows how we have been expanding quite rapidly recently. As a total company, we're in the region of about 1,500 people. And we now have 15 locations, with having opened up some UK offices most recently as well, being our Newcastle office. As we continue to open on new locations, it's really important that we want to make sure that we continue to embody, embrace and demonstrate our core BJSS values. And you can see some of these that we've got on here. And really, to be honest, I could probably spend a few hours talking about all of them, but don't worry, I won't be. But it is really important that as we open up our new offices, as Pedro will mention, and I'm sure it'll come through from Rebecca and Mark's stories as well, about how important, again, to keep our BJSS brand. And a brand's not just a logo, a brand is how we operate, the integrity that we show as people and as delivery professionals, how we work collaboratively with our clients. It's really important to us to keep building those long-term relationships, whether the client's UK-based, US-based, or anywhere in the world. So again, it's really important that we continue to show those values and be really true to them. Then on this next slide, we just wanted to show you really sort of a bit of a cross-section of the different clients that we have, because it not only shows from seeing our footprint on the world map as to how we're expanding internationally, but we do work with some truly international brands. So it's a really exciting period to look at. We've got international brands and clients, we've got international locations, and actually the marrying of the two together and how we're operating more and more of our delivery projects in cross-location. And that's not just within the UK, but looking at how we can use our Lisbon people and workforce and our US colleagues to form sort of truly international deliveries. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into who we are and what we're doing and why this international growth is so important to us and how we're looking to do it. I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Pedro, who's going to talk to you more about our Portugal office and his involvement in that. So over to you, Pedro.
Thank you, Hannah. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about our expansion to Portugal. So I personally like to design meaning for humans. So that means making sure that whatever we create and develop has a reason behind it, and it's user-centered. So I'm the head of delivery for BJSS in Portugal. We have an office in Lisbon, and this is my story. I also like photographing insects, which doesn't really matter for this story, but I thought it'd be good to share that everyone has a lot of different passions. So first of all, I was born an introvert and I was very shy. In school, I was really never good at anything in particular, and I wasn't particularly bad at anything either. I was a bit of a wallflower, to be honest, which has its perks. You wouldn't probably notice me in school. I was just in a corner with some people having a chat. I always loved technology. I remember my dad, my brother playing with Spectrum, and I've always been surrounded by elements of technology, and I thought that was very interesting. Strategy and imagination always played a big part of who I am, from Lego to Magic to board games to being able to imagine and construct ideas. And I think for as long as I can remember, I've always been looking into creativity and imagination. I also realized from a very young age how different the world is for some. So my mom is a teacher of kids with special needs. So I've always been surrounded by people with disabilities. And growing up, that really opened my eyes, because I got to see how different the world is, depending on which disability you may or may not have. And I think that is important to carry on as to how we devise solutions for people. And also how technology can help many and creating endless possibilities through code, through services that are digital in nature. I always wanted to become a musician, so I decided to study computer science. Reason being that if that failed, I would really invest in something that could pay my bills. I still want to become a musician, and I still am a musician of sorts. I had a band in Leeds, and music is still a big part of my nature. My parents always told me that I should pick a proper career and focus on it, and stop dabbling with guitar and singing. However, I've always enjoyed many different things, sometimes unrelated, and I believe that one day these things would come together. And BJSS allows me to be a lot of different things, which I really appreciate. So I'm driven not by the instrument, but instead by the symphony that can be produced by the multitude of areas of knowledge, of different things that shouldn't be combined, but actually work well together. I really like the aspect of merging concepts that would be unrelated if you were just specializing in something to its limit. So I like these symphonies that sometimes we produce. I also love traveling, but until I was 16 years old, I had never left Portugal. So I was just that cat looking out the window, kind of stuck at home. Since then, I decided to start exploring the world. So I've been to all these places. So the list is not done yet. I still have a lot to explore. So once the lockdown starts to resume and the pandemic is a bit more under control, I'll continue to explore the world, because I think this is important for me, because I get to see how different the world is and how similar the world is across countries. So I moved to the UK in 2012 and decided to settle in Leeds as a city out of all places. Why Leeds? Well, at least my experience there, Leeds has a can-do attitude. It's young and vibrant. It's very hands-on. It's tech-savvy. It's green. It's friendly. Very entrepreneurial. It's digital. It's diverse. It's open-minded, professional. It's crafty and artistic. And I really, really loved all the time that I spent in Leeds. I still hold Leeds very dear to my heart. Also in Leeds, I got to join BJSS in 2017. And I joined with a very particular mission, which was to set up Spark in the Leeds office. So when I joined, Spark was a very small unit within BJSS with about 4 people, all based in London. So I had to really understand what Spark stands for and implement that in Leeds, which is also a tricky thing to achieve, because if you imagine there's 400 people there, mostly developers, and you're trying to explain to everyone I guess, new or different dimensions of how to do deliveries in projects. So SPARK is the design thinking proposition of BJSS. It stands for service design, user research, product design, strategy design. But what all these things have in common is we try to ensure solutions we develop are focused on the end user, and that we understand that end user in its complexity. In BJSS, I've done a lot of different things. So service design, capability leadership, team leadership, front-end development, business analysis, delivery management, research, product design, strategy design, culture design, and now office design. So I've done all these things not because I was asked to do, but because I like to explore different dimensions of knowledge and understand projects from different points of view and understanding teams from different points of view. And BJSS allows me to experiment with these areas, and I really appreciate that. And then I had an idea. So having left Portugal, I always thought that if I ever return, I would like to bring back something meaningful. So I thought that it would be great to be able to bring BJSS into Portugal. So I started thinking deeply about this in secrecy, so studying the country, learning all the different trends, what was happening with the world, what was happening with Brexit, trying to understand what would be the angle here. So after 1 year of planning, I decided to present my strategy to BJSS. 2 months later, I was in Lisbon setting up an office. So this was, although it was done quickly, it was done with a lot of thought from all aspects of BJSS and myself. And then after landing in Lisbon, the pandemic started. So we went back to the boxes. And we decided to start hiring in August and started delivering projects. So we have our first seeds here, seedlings growing. At a time of high uncertainty where global markets were contracting, we chose to expand as a company. And this is important to reflect upon. It's important to be bold even when all the markets are stating otherwise. We are now 35 and growing. 6 months have passed. We have 27 active people and 8 are joining in the coming weeks. So we are growing in Lisbon as an office. We are now the fastest growing office in BJSS. This office is diverse by design. We have 28% female and growing, and we have now 11 nationalities. So Bulgaria, Macedonia, Portugal, United Kingdom, Angola, Ireland, South Africa, Spain, Brazil, Germany, and Venezuela. I really like diversity. I live and grow around diversity, and I wanted to make sure that was a big element of Lisbon. All these people are based in Lisbon, obviously, and Lisbon is actually a very diverse city. We've done 20 plus engagements to date, so I mean projects from different sizes and times or durations. And we've been aligning processes. So for us, aligning processes means that we have the same recruitment flows, the same resourcing discussions, same procurement channels, looking at commercial with the same heads of practices, looking at contracts, culture, identity, history, ways of working, value, structure. We're trying to build, crossing all the offices, a hive mind approach where we support each other no matter how distant we are physically from one another. This is very important because I can harness all of this building Lisbon. But why Portugal? Well, Portugal is extremely diverse. It's always been. So the Martin Page, which is actually one of the developers of the first Tomb Raider, wrote this book, First Global Village, talking about how Lisbon's always been very diverse and Portugal as a whole. So I wanted to mention that. Also, we have a lot of high quality technical talent. We don't have just Ronaldo, we have other people that are very good in their trades. So the quality of talent in Portugal and Lisbon is very high. We also have the same time zone, so we're both on Greenwich, and we're very close to the UK, only 2.5 hours away by flight. We have very similar ways of working, and actually we have the oldest alliance based on known history in the world through the Treaty of Windsor, which was signed in 1386 by Portugal and the UK. So I thought I would mention this nice fact. Portuguese people have multi-language fluency, so most people speak at least 2 languages, and that is very useful if you're trying to work in a global company. Then weather and quality of living. I think we can all agree that Portugal is very sunny, very green, and it's a nice place to live. Also, Lisbon, funnily enough, has a lot of comparables to San Francisco. So they both have suspension bridges built by the same architect, Eiffel. We are both close to coastal beaches. We have trams. Both cities have been hit by an earthquake that wiped the entire city. 80% of the city, to be more precise, 85 in the case of San Francisco. Both close to wine cultures and fields of wine or grapes, comparable climate, a lot of street art, startup ecosystem, diversity, and they're both very hilly. Lisbon has a very vast startup ecosystem, so just some numbers here. There's been 7,264 companies created in Lisbon in 2018. 500 so startups in incubators, generating 5,730 jobs in incubators. So there's a lot of modern technologies and experimentation happening in Lisbon. So we want to make sure that we could harness that knowledge and that expertise. Also, from the 2019 Nations Expat Index, so Portugal was mentioned as number 3 back then. I'm not counting 2020 because the world went back home, and that kind of shuffled everything to something that is not really accurate. But suffice to say that Portugal is quite well ranked in expat destinations. Also, quality of living, number 1, leisure options, number 2, personal happiness, health and well-being, safety, security, digital life, travel and transportation. So it's well positioned for people to work in this country, in this city. Also, the most likely to be recommended expat life destination, Portugal, number 41, is the most recommended in 2019 by Internations when surveying people. So starting an office feels like a giant game of chess. There's a lot of pieces moving. So you start off like a fledgling bird, trying to give the first steps into the world. But in BJSS, you actually are standing on the shoulders of giants. Although we are almost like a startup, we are a startup that is part of a much larger organization that already has a lot of defined ways of working. So that's easier than launching a pure startup out of the blue. And then you kind of become a scribe. You have to translate and transport a culture from one country to another, making sure that you don't miss anything, you don't leave anything out. You also become a scholar, trying to study law, regulation, rules. What is different? What has to change? What is comparable in Portugal and in the United Kingdom or the US? You become an alchemist because you are still small enough to experiment. You get to choose which elements to replicate, which elements to remove because they're not necessary, and trying to build almost like a top of the charts, greatest hits to transport into a new reality. You become a conductor, so trying to make sure that everybody's playing a symphony and trying to guide people. You become an explorer because you are effectively in new grounds, you're in a new country with a new culture, trying to replicate BJSS. So you start to explore for opportunities wherever they are. You become a very good listener because you are, a lot of times you are wrong. A lot of times you have a good hunch, but most importantly, you have to be able to listen to everyone. Make sure that you are quick at changing your mind whenever the information is right. You have to spot the differences between the two countries to map out what needs to change. Like I was talking about, it is not a like-for-like carbon copy of one office to another. Each office has its own nuances, which are specific to that region, that country, to that location. You become a ladder, and you use the ladder to elevate people around you, making sure that the people that you hire are praised for their good work, and you spot whenever good work happens. And more importantly, you support making that happen, which is important. You are not the office, you are just the front of the office. So the office is comprised by people, and these people need to be praised and need to be elevated. You become a compass to show the north and try and guide people towards the direction, whatever that is. You become a sponge because you have to absorb a lot of information very quickly. You have to become a master of everything very quickly, and also understanding where you just don't have the knowledge, so you need to rely on someone else. So you become a very big sponge. You become an octopus trying to make sure that no plates break whenever you are spinning plates, making sure that you are aware of everything around you, and you can spread your tentacles into different parts of the organization to seek for support, for help, and for expertise. You become a rock because you have to be a point of reference for any questions. You have to be able to suss out any concerns, and you have to listen to any ideas. So you're kind of just there to listen and to help. You become a sounding board whenever anyone comes with specific ideas and they wanna test them out. You are always there to listen and to empower people to go after what they think is right. You become an interface with the other offices, making sure that anyone can connect to you and that you can also help people whenever they join any project. You become a fox, trying to understand and spot whenever an opportunity presents itself so that you can jump in. You have to be very fast at this because opportunities come and go very quickly. So you need to be always attentive, just behind the bushes, looking at whatever is coming your way. You become a chameleon because you morph your shape, your colors, depending on what's happening, trying to go unnoticed, but also to survive in a very competitive environments. Because when you are in any capital city, there's a lot of competition there. So I quite like the aspect that not everyone knows that BJSS exists in Portugal, because that is the silent element of surprise, but also you need to blend whenever you need to blend. You become very introspective and reflective about the fact that everything you say carries a lot of importance to people. So you have to be very mindful of what you say, how you say it, and you have to reflect on how you want this office to evolve. And you start to stretch. You stretch a lot. I call them stretch targets because I think these are periods of time where you stretch to a point that takes you to another level, and then you reflect on that and you rest a bit. I think this is what makes us grow quickly. So we shouldn't be stretching all the time, but these stretch targets are important because they elevate your knowledge and they elevate your experiences. You become fearless because you can't really be afraid of the unknown. You just have to embrace it. And whatever comes your way, you need to be able to understand what to do with that information. So that also means that failing is much easier to do because you're just smaller. So embracing failure, embracing the unknown and the fear that comes with it. The fear never goes away. You just have to understand that it's there, and you contemplate that just like you would contemplate a lotus flower, and then you move on. So why does this matter? This matter because what you think you need and what you actually need are two different things. And this has to do with every single thing you decide in your life. You will never be fully prepared to take on the responsibilities of a particular key decision. So if you take an approach of, I need to learn everything fast, you're never going to take off. So you kind of have to acknowledge that you're never going to know everything. You're never going to be fully prepared. So this is as truthful for people as it is for organizations. When deciding to risk on a new country, on a new proposition, on a new approach, you can't plan for everything. You can only plan for what you know, what is useful about the idea, And then all the other things will fall into place as you go through the experience. It is the actual experience that teaches you and prepares you, and not the preparation itself. So for us as BJSS, international expansion is not about becoming an nearshoring set of offices or options. For us, all offices are equal, and it's about the ability to deliver the same quality of work wherever you are in BJSS. And that is the common denominator across all the international expansion. We are all the same, and how can you replicate and scale the quality of work that comes from Leeds into the world? So this is very important. You have to continue to be yourself in your own multitude. It's okay to like a lot of different things. It's okay to be diverse. It's okay to have second thoughts. It's okay to like things that shouldn't match or shouldn't go hand in hand. Because when you are yourself, you become much more inside an organization. So you become the unexpected. You become, and this also applies to technical solutions, to how you write code. The multitude is important. So it's a new dawn. It's a new day. And we're feeling good in sunny Lisbon. So thank you. So I'll hand over now to Rebecca to share her experience of moving into Lisbon as software engineer.
Cool, thank you, Pedro. I had quite a different experience to Pedro. I joined quite a long time after a lot of this stuff had happened, so I didn't have to worry about that as much as he obviously did. I found out about the opportunity to transfer to the Lisbon office in November and really just jumped at the chance. Due to various factors, mostly Brexit related, everything had to happen really quite quickly after that. So I found myself planning to pull out of a house purchase, move to a country where I didn't speak the language during a global pandemic over Christmas, and also racing against Brexit, which if that all sounds a little bit negative, or at least not very poorly planned, I've kind of chosen to highlight it that way because I think there never is a good time to uproot your life. You can always find a reason why it wouldn't, like, do it later, put it off, and it would never happen. So I think, although it's completely natural for it to feel a little bit scary and maybe a little bit overwhelming, I think it is something that's really worth doing. And I have not regretted for one moment moving to Lisbon. So I had always wanted to live abroad. I've always wanted to learn a language, which I think is very difficult in England because it's not something that we're known for. It's really difficult if you're not going to get the immersion as well. And also if you don't have the motivation, if you know you're not going to use it very often. So I always wanted to try that, always wanted to try a new culture. And the really great thing about doing it within your existing company is that everything is just so much easier. So both me and my husband received a lot of help from BJSS on kind of both the professional and the personal side. So getting all the paperwork sorted, advice on areas to live in, just everything. To the extent that I had Pedro on speed dial when I was flying in, because the rules for getting through Portuguese immigration were changing all the time with additional restrictions. So yeah, I felt very supported at all times, had consistent points of contact. I'm not saying that it doesn't require any thought or effort on your part. It definitely does. But it's the difference between knowing that it will happen and that nothing will go wrong. I had things to do, but I was never worried that we would get there and find that we didn't have the right to stay, or that we would have registered for tax incorrectly and be fined lots of money. Like, I was confident it was always going to work fine. And to be honest, once we did a lot of that and we arrived, a lot less stuff changed than you might have thought. We stayed in our existing projects working remotely, which I actually think is something that the pandemic probably really helped with, because obviously everyone was remote. So our day-to-day working was pretty much identical, just in a new location. It sounds a little anticlimactic, I guess, to say it that way, but actually it was really helpful at a time when everything else was changing, to have that common consistency, to know what you're working on, to still see some of the same faces each day on your project. And it gave us the time to explore this new amazing place that we were living in, obviously within the rules, taste the food, drink the wine, try and knuckle down on learning some of the language, which actually, the language is the other thing probably that will differ a little bit between my experience and I think Mark, who's going to come after me, obviously moving to the New York office. And that is something that I did deliberately. Having said earlier, I always wanted to learn a language. That's kind of part of the reason I picked the Lisbon office, and I probably wouldn't have chosen it had I not been interested in learning the language. But kind of equally, that goes hand in hand with the fact that it was an absolute godsend that we're working in business English. Learning a new language is great, but doing it to the standard that you can work on it without friction is not something that is going to happen overnight. So the company being international rather than being Portuguese specifically has definitely made everything so much easier for me personally. And then outside of the specific project I'm on, the team here has been incredibly welcoming, supportive, like just generally just such a fantastic and great group of guys. And I really think that although I'm sure it would have been that way anyway, part of that has come around from the fact that we're kind of all pretty new. We're forming something new together rather than me joining something that already exists where people already have things in place, they have their lives, they have their setup. It's really great to kind of feel like we're making something together. And obviously we have got the experience from the BJSS guys that have worked in other offices to try and bring, as Pedro said, some of that culture, some of that consistency, but we're able to pick and choose the best things from all areas. We've got that. And then we've also got this amazing array of cultures and experiences coming from everybody else. And it really is an array. Pedro, I think, had a more complete list of the nationalities on his slide than I've got noted down here. But yeah, I think it was like, what, 11 different nationalities in an office of like 30 people. So that's been really, really cool. And it also kind of changes things within yourself as well. Like you notice things that you've always taken for granted in your culture that aren't always true. So I know the stereotypical British Reserve is kind of a bit of a joke to us, but I think you do notice kind of that it is true. It's not a massive thing, but it is a thing when you're in somewhere that doesn't have that. And it's really lovely because it lets you explore a different side of yourself and put forward like a side of yourself that you maybe would have chosen not to in different circumstances because of the different expectations. So that's been really cool. It's quite honestly, it's been amazing. So I do realise that the title of my bit of the talk was supposed to be moving to Lisbon as a dev or as a software engineer, sorry. And I haven't really said anything specific to being a software engineer, but honestly, that is just because that bit is universal. Everything is so interconnected these days. I think especially like these days specifically with COVID, it's kind of had a massive impact in dragging even the most hesitant of companies into a functional working from home setup. So there's always going to be like a few little niggles, like specifically on my project, I'm working with medical data and there are rules around which countries that can be in. So that has a little bit restricted what I can do with specifically live data on my project. But that's a very small part of my day-to-day work and it's easily reshuffled within my team. So the vast majority has not changed. And in terms of working as part of a blended team, so having people in different locations, that's actually not something that I thought would be a problem or that has been a problem either. The team that I'm on was already a mixture of 4 different consultancies plus the permanent staff, even though we're all based in Leeds. So you may mostly be the same nationality, but you've still got that massive mix of cultures and viewpoints and stuff. And it's never been a problem. I'm massively a believer that most people are nice, most people are good, most people want things to work. So it's just a non-issue from that point of view. So yeah, my opinion on it is if you're interested, really just do it. There will never be a perfect time. And I always think that thinking about it gives you more opportunity to worry about things going wrong than once you're actually doing it. Once you're actually doing it, you've either got things to do that you're focused on or you're there and it's fine and the worries have passed. So yeah, that would be my advice. Don't regret it at all. And now I'm going to hand over to Mark, who is going to talk about his experiences moving to the US office.
Certainly try. I'm very glad that you went after Pedro, by the way, with a single slide, because I've got the same rather than his 1,000-slide bonanza. So we'll see how it goes. I'm also conscious that I've gone last. I've put a bullet list there of things I was going to cover. I'm now not so sure I'm going to cover all of that. I was diligently crossing out parts of my notes as Pedro overran his official time. And I'd like to make sure that I don't really duplicate or repeat anything people have said. So I'll try and think on my feet a little bit. I'll probably start by echoing what Rebecca said. It's absolutely never a good time to move. If you add to the story that Rebecca gave, the photo there, that's my little girl, that's my eldest. So you've got schools to think about if you're emigrating with a family with children. There was no Brexit deadline for me, but that meant there was always a visa immigration process to negotiate and work your way through. But they are just obstacles. There's always a reason not to do something. It's whether you want to do it or not. So I think what I'll probably talk about, try and keep it different, is the fact that the New York office and the move for me is maybe in a different phase to what Pedro and Rebecca have been talking about. I'd called New York an established office before I joined. I think I'll maybe get these numbers wrong. I think it's maybe 7 years old, our New York office, and I've been out here for coming up for 2 years. Speaking of those visa issues, I know that it's coming up for 2 years, 4 visa related issues that I'll not bore people to tears with. And for me, one of the things I've worked for BJSS for a long, long time. One of the things I've always given great credit to BJSS for is responding to things when they're not quite working. So we've grown hugely in the UK over the last 5-10 years, and we've changed the way that we've worked as a result of that. I hope it's fair to say that we've had a few growing pains as we've grown in the UK. Probably the easiest example would be quite recently, we've overhauled our line management process quite severely for the better, in my opinion. But we've had a few of these restructures in the UK. Sometimes it worked great, sometimes it worked but didn't fully work, in that it solved the problems that we saw, but maybe it created, or at least shone a light on some problems that we hadn't seen before we'd made that change. So we looked at it again, and I really like that about BJSS. I talk about it a lot in our recruitment process, because I think genuinely it shows a desire to get things right. From trying to bring it back to international and emigrating, from a personal standpoint, I'd really like to be involved in making changes before they're necessary, rather than after the fact, after something has to change, because as I say, those growing pains, because things maybe aren't quite working anymore. And that's something that I've struggled to do a little bit in the UK, and it's certainly not through a lack of trying on my part, maybe I should say a lack of belligerence on my part, and it's certainly not to do with a lack of receptiveness in any of the offices in the UK. But we're a 27-year-old organisation in the UK, and these things are not easy to fix. But to have the opportunity to come out to New York when we're in a position where we're really looking at applying, if I can call these lessons learned or learnings from the UK, to try and apply the structure that we now know works in the UK, that we know scales up, because we've got some quite large offices in the UK, to put that in place here in New York, whilst we're still a small office. I think we're 40 people in New York. So to put that in place ahead of the growth, ahead of it strictly being necessary, is something that interests me. It's something that's a big draw for me, at least. I think maybe the best that I can summarize it is that I've worked for BJSS on and off. I'll come back to that, for over 10 years. But I've worked for consultancies my entire career. And for me, that's a career spent building things for clients, but more often than not, 9 times out of 10, with a remit for changing their ways of working, for changing the way that these things are built, trying to make lasting changes. Personally, I take a lot more pride in the latter than just hitting a deadline that somebody's set. And as I said a second ago, I've maybe done that, or rather, I've categorically done that a lot more for our clients than I have for the organisation that I work for. And to come out to New York as we're about to grow the office out here, for me is something that I'd really like to be involved in, getting it right for my peers, getting it right for people that work for BJSS out in New York. Sorry, I keep glancing at my time. So talk about me a little bit. I've emigrated twice, as I say, and maybe to kind of elaborate on something that Rebecca touched on a little bit. The thing that struck me the most, having emigrated twice, is as soon as you tell friends and family, the immediate question is why are you moving? Because to them you're leaving. So why are you moving? And I really get the impression, certainly with parents and very close family, they're looking for a simple reason, probably that really cliched, a job offer that's too good to turn down, or something equally black and white. I can't speak for everybody. Certainly won't speak for Rebecca or Pedro, but for me, it never was. There was never one single reason. It was never as simple as that. There are a lot of reasons why I've emigrated. There are a lot of reasons why I moved to New York, some of which are work related that I just talked about. Others have got absolutely nothing to do with work. And for me, that's right. For me, that's how it should be. I think if we're given advice, my advice would be if it's really just one thing, if that one thing doesn't quite pan out the way that you thought it would, you're a long way from home. Whereas if you're emigrating for a lot of reasons, some small, some big, even if that big one, that main one doesn't quite pan out, you've still a lot of reasons, a lot of justification, and a lot of purpose for being where you are. I actually moved, I don't know whether I should admit this, I actually moved to New York having never visited New York before. I've been to America, but I've been to all the tourist hotspots that you'd expect. I've been to Disney World in Florida, Vegas and the Grand Canyon. I've been out to San Francisco in California, but never actually New York. And I understand that's crazy or scary to some people. That's a big leap, especially with a wife and children in tow. But I guess it's personality. I guess it's just what you want out of your life, or if that's a bit grand, what you want out of your career. And that's certainly something I want out of my career. I want to be involved in this opportunity in a smaller office to help it grow, to have a lasting impact on the way that we operate out here in New York, and to live in another culture. And it's easy as a Brit to think of America as the same culture, but it's not. I'll avoid politics, but given the pandemic and what's happened in America and the UK over the last 2 years, it's a very different place. And I could talk for hours to people if they're interested. All I'll say here really is, in that photo, that's my eldest daughter. Last winter, building a snowman, and she's coming up for 6, so she remembers England, and there are things that she misses about England. There are people, there are places, especially given the pandemic, we haven't visited home in 2 years. So we talk about it a lot, and the way I talk to my daughter about it is genuinely how I feel about it. There are things that we miss about England, but there are things that we've grown to love about America. And one day we'll leave America, and there'll be things that we miss about America as well. Before we had kids, my wife and I have lived in Hong Kong for a few years. There are absolutely things that I miss about Hong Kong. I spent some time working in Vietnam. There's, for me, I guess to try and touch on something Pedro said as well, I'm equally a big believer in diversity, but the way I'd phrase it is, for me and hopefully for my family, for my children, there's no one country that's a perfect fit for us. Don't get me wrong, I feel British, certainly out in America, I feel very British. It makes me feel very British being out here in America, but there's absolutely no one country that fits perfectly. I'd liken that, I'm going to stay away from politics, but I'd liken that to politics. There's no one ideology that fits me perfectly. And as far as my little girl is concerned, she's not been to Manhattan because of the pandemic maybe as often as she would have, but she's been there scores of times. And what she knows about Manhattan is that's where hot dogs live. I think she has never been to Manhattan and failed to have a hot dog. And by a hot dog, I mean those really, if anyone's visited New York, I mean those really cheap and awful $2 hot dogs in a stall on the side of the street, that as a parent, I don't even really want to know what the percentage of meat is in those hot dogs. But that's what she knows about Manhattan. That's what she knows about America. And one day we'll miss it. We'll miss America. We'll miss hot dogs. We'll miss giant pizza. But hopefully that's a long time in the future. So I'm looking at my time. I'm really conscious that I'm now in danger of overrunning my time, having taken a dig at Pedro. So to bring it back to BJSS and talk about culture a little bit, I'm going to steal something my chief architect out in New York always says. I had a quick look at the participants. I know he was on the call, so now I'm very self-conscious of saying this. But what our chief architect out here says when we're talking about recruitment and career progression and line management is, success to BJSS is if you stay with us until you retire. And I really like that. I like that because of what it implies. I think it shows our culture. I think it reflects a very healthy culture as an employer. I'm certainly not saying that we're perfect, but as a high level objective, if it were a board level objective, it'd be fantastic, because to me it implies that you've been fulfilled in your career, that there's been no need to move. To tie it to the theme of this talk, that you've been able to have, if wanderlust is the right word for my personality, you've been able to live in different cities. You've been supported, whether it is in tech stack, whether it's in the industry that you worked in, and that could be about pride in what you do, that could be about your ethics, whether it's in role, myself, Pedro, Rebecca, we're all in different roles here at BJSS, whether it location. I mean, pre-pandemic, as far as location goes, we'd be talking about commute in terms of work-life balance. Now, as a company, like many other across the world, we seem to be talking about hybrid working patterns instead of commute. But to stick with culture, I'm over my time. It's too, and it would take an hour to talk to you about the BJSS culture. I'm not arrogant enough to try and summarize that in just a little soundbite. But the importance for me in the growth that we've had thus far is in seeding these offices. We've done it in the UK for a couple of decades, but with Pedro going out to Lisbon, my predecessors that moved out from the UK offices to seed the New York and the Houston offices that we've got out here in America, they inherently take that culture, Rebecca touched on, that element of British culture, of the office identity out with them. And without that, to just choose a city that we're going to move into, a country that we're going to grow into and start recruiting there, it would feel, I think you're in danger of it being more like a franchise, where sure there'd be rules, sure there'd be principles that would probably be printed on posters and hung on the wall, but without someone that's lived and breathed it for a few years, I don't know how you genuinely do grow in the way that we want to, that natural growth, that one company identity. So I'll try and wrap up, but for me, in the future, I want to be a part of that growth. I'd love to see more people make that jump from the UK, because I think culture is important. It moves two ways. The only thing I'd say probably on that is, and hopefully it's fair to say, Pedro touched on the diversity that we've got in Lisbon. New York, probably a more culturally diverse place than a lot of others in the world, probably than Lisbon, certainly than Leeds. I think that's fair to say, a little city in the north of England. And there are things that we naturally have to flex in our company policy and our company culture when we move out to these countries. And that's a healthy thing, because maybe flex is the wrong word, maybe it's absorb some of the more local cultures and ways of working into that international identity that we're developing. And if it's not too grand a note to end on, I hope my children have the same choices and the same attitude to life. I hope they have a bit more of a global identity maybe than their grandparents have, and don't see anywhere, America, the UK, Hong Kong as their sole identity as anything permanent, because no move has to be permanent. And yeah, I'll leave it on that, and I think I'll try and hand over to Rich.
Hey, thanks everyone. Sorry about that. Okay, great. So what is next for BJSS? Where are we going to? And I think, sorry, I just got to get that right there. What I want to touch on is the international nature of tech itself. We're not just going about the world sharing culture alone, but we're sharing tech. But what's interesting is I got into tech when I lived in Japan. I lived in Japan for 15 years. And even though the tech is very similar, often the viewpoint towards tech is totally different. And there's all sorts of lessons that we can learn through this. And I just want to touch on a few elements of tech that I think have been particularly interesting and fascinating. Because even though there's some very extreme differences in our thoughts towards it, some of the things that we're looking at are exactly the same. So I don't know if you look at this screen and you know what one of these IDs is. This is a UUID. It's a universally unique identifier. And whenever you order a McDonald's, other hamburgers are available, in the ordering system, one of these will be placed against that burger. One of these will be placed against your order. One of them may even be placed against you as a customer. When you go and order a COVID test, you will scan a barcode and this will use a UUID. And this is something that's very similar. These are being generated all over the world for you as an individual, for any consumer, for any product, any time that something sent somebody somewhere, one of these will get generated. And that's universal. And another word for these is globally unique identifier, which is almost in this sense a lot more apt. So we've got a bunch of standards that are emerging, and the standards are built on tried and tested technology that actually in its simplest form is completely elegant. It's completely seamless in its operation, and we're using these standards day to day in what we're doing as software engineers. I said that I learned tech in Japan. I have a Japanese mentor. And my mentor is an absolute fan of rest. And we go to the bathhouse in Japan and we sit there naked because everyone does that. It's a normal thing. And we talk about rest for an hour, you know, and just those different perspectives and digging in deep into something that's beautiful, that's elegant. And that's what HTTP is, that's what REST is, and that's what the World Wide Web is. It's worldwide. It was intended to reach a global audience. It was intended to reach just beyond the businesses that we're servicing in Leeds or in Lisbon or in New York, but to go even further, to actually link computer to computer, people to people. And we're starting to see this shape our thinking in the way that we do business. And I think we pick up a client that may be local to us, and then we start thinking, well, how does this tie into this international network? And one example of that is a fire standard, and those who are involved with medical software will be familiar with this. Just similar to how REST is used all over the world for HTTP calls, FHIR is used for medical API calls. And by investing into this standard and looking into this standard and saying, how can we connect these medical services together robustly, is a way that we can more safely share medical data with different companies, with different services, whether it's be the NHS or whether it be healthcare systems all over the world. So now we've been able to go from just thinking about the NHS side of things, the UK side of things, your local GP side of things, to how can we connect hospital to hospital, pathology lab to pathology lab. And this is where we going to see so much growth in the future, because no longer is healthcare just about UK alone. It's about the international networking side of it. And us as technology vendors are now a key part of that. We're actually enabling that to happen. So at the moment, we have plugs. We have a bunch of plugs that we're trying to plug into different sockets. And yeah, we can do that. And we're getting there. And we've got these little bit of a different understanding about how these different plugs work. But that's the plug of yesterday. This is what myself or you might think of as a plug or a consent if you're in another country. In Japan, they call it consento. But this is the plug of today. This is a USB-C connector. Young people will see this is more of a universal plug, because this is, you can plug it in wherever you go. And this is how the world's changing. And we're actually riding that wave alongside. And one part of what's enabler for that is cloud computing as well. So we've got the hardware side, we've got now the rollout of hardware and software that's going out together. And this is a printing press. And the printing press is actually what transformed the thinking all over the world. And so until the printing press was invented, people's knowledge was incredibly local. It was incredibly limited to what they had had experience of, to suddenly, actually, we can now get a book from one place to another. We can get writings en masse and distribute them. And computing is now in an age where it is going completely global, and it's going global at pace, and there's standards that we're all adopting. And now I think almost every country is now heavily invested in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud platforms. And these are almost native ways of thinking and growing for any business over the world. We're heavily involved in cloud computing at BJSS, and that's really at the heart of our business model. And so cloud computing is also, what it's enabled us to do is to get closer to our users. I remember my first deployment of an application. I was in Japan, and I put that website on a server, and the server was probably somewhere in downtown Osaka. And I'm connecting it to it from, my little Osaka street address, and it's blazingly fast. I'm like, isn't my website so fast? And I'm super proud of myself. And then I tell my mum, hey, look, mum, look at how fast my website is. She's like, no, it's dog slow, Rich. What are you doing? But then you realize, well, actually, it's a physical server that's located in one location. And now with edge computing, we're able to now deploy an application, and if you use AWS Lambda Edge, for example, you can deploy your application into 225 plus locations in a single click. It's at the tip of our fingertips that we can just do that so easily. So, we're using these cloud resources, and we're using them to connect data with IDs, and the whole concept of data is that other area that's completely growing, and we're investing into it very largely at BJSS as well, where we're looking at data science, we're looking at data scientists and analysts and architects and platform engineers. And that's where we're growing, because we know that that's going to be a worldwide phenomenon that we're just following along. So Satya Nadella, who's the Microsoft CEO, says everything is going to be connected to cloud and data. And all of this will be mediated by software, and that software engineering that's part of our culture at BJSS is something that we're using to tie together all of these powerful systems and concepts and technologies to bring software to the rest of the world, just as we heard from Pedro, Mark, and Rebecca. So what is next? That's something that Sarah's going to follow on the theme on. And over to you, Sarah.
Hello. So I have 60 seconds before this event ends. So this is going to be very, very quick. So, I mean, you can read from this slide, but the things that I really want to get across is, today was about our international expansion. And I think what's most important and why we wanted to do it this way is for you to hear people's stories. I think that they have been, and people will always be, the key to a consultancy like BJSS's growth and capability to grow into those regions. And hearing from Pedro at the beginning, I think it's really cool that, actually it was about following his passion as much as the organization's. So that's very, very cool. There is a couple of Q&As and I'll quickly answer. One was just about international expansion, and we've talked about it here, but actually we are looking to grow in every one of our existing regions, but we also do have a head of international expansion. So I think by hiring that person, it very much says that we are going to be continuing to grow as an organization. And just looking at headcount, in the last financial year, we grew by over 750 people, and we really anticipate that to be more next year. So it's a fantastic opportunity to join us, partner with us, be a client, because, you know, this is a really exciting time of change for BJSS. You know, my role as head of digital transformation, that's been an area that we've been growing in, but actually really wanted to, you know, make sure that we had that service clear, and that we've been able to go out and you know, work differently with our clients, and that's been a real success and is growing. And also areas of new innovation, so starting services around RPA, AI and other new technologies, and being able to bring those to our existing and new clients. Just closing it, I guess two things that are very important is that we're very, very much invested in growing talent, and that is our own talent and young people. So looking at our academy, and that's going to be from apprenticeship level upwards. So we really, really, really want to make sure that we're investing in the cities that, and, you know, countries that we move to, and that we build our teams and we grow and bring roles and jobs to those cities. And also, we really have a big commitment to Leeds. You know, it was mentioned at the beginning that BJSS was founded in this city, and, you know, it's the heart, it's where the culture started, it's where we started as an organisation. And so, you know, it's part of our makeup, it's part of our DNA, and probably part of those reasons that Pedro mentioned about moving to Leeds, and the reason that he fell in love with the city. So, you know, we're very committed, and we'll be working very closely with Leeds City Council, taking part in events, getting involved with the community, and making sure that Leeds is just as important as it's ever been to the growth and culture of BJSS. So thank you so much for joining us. I know we've run over. I hope you've really enjoyed our stories and been inspired today. I think it's interesting to hear people who can just go and make that jump, but actually, you know, the fruitfulness it's brought to their lives. So thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to our attendees. And thank you for being part of our digital festival event.